In the spring of 1950, just 5 years after the most devastating war in human history, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman stood before the press with an audacious proposal. He suggested that France and Germany, bitter enemies who had fought 3 wars in 70 years, should pool their coal and steel production under a common authority. The room fell silent. To most observers, the idea seemed not just ambitious, but absurd. Yet this single declaration would set in motion a chain of events that would fundamentally reshape the European continent and create what we know today as the European Union. But how did Europe go from centuries of warfare to becoming the world's most integrated political and economic bloc? The answer is a story of visionary thinking, pragmatic compromise, and the determination to ensure that the horrors of the past would never repeat themselves. To understand why Schuman's declaration was so revolutionary, we need to grasp the context of post-war Europe. By 1945, the continent lay in ruins. An estimated 40 million Europeans had perished. Cities were reduced to rubble, economies had collapsed, and millions of displaced persons wandered through the devastation. But beyond the physical destruction, there was a deeper crisis of confidence. Europe, which had dominated global affairs for centuries, had nearly destroyed itself through nationalist rivalry and militarism. The question facing European leaders was existential. How could they rebuild their nations while preventing the cycle of revenge and rearmament that had plagued the continent since the Franco-Prussian War of 1870? The answer came from an unlikely source. Jean Monnet, a French political economist and cognac merchant who had never held elected office, believed that the only way to prevent future wars was to make them materially impossible. His insight was brilliantly simple. If you integrated the very industries that made war possible, coal and steel, nations couldn't fight even if they wanted to. Coal powered factories and railways, steel built tanks and artillery. By placing these resources under shared control, former enemies would become economically interdependent. Monnet convinced Schuman to champion this idea, and on May 9, 1950, the Schuman Declaration was born. It proposed creating a supranational authority to manage coal and steel production across participating nations, with membership open to any European country willing to join. The response was swift. West Germany, still occupied and seeking rehabilitation into the international community, embraced the proposal enthusiastically. Chancellor Konrad Adenauer saw it as a path to regain sovereignty and respectability. Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg also signed on, recognizing both the economic benefits and the political symbolism. On April 18, 1951, these 6 nations signed the Treaty of Paris, establishing the European Coal and Steel Community, or ECSC. This wasn't just a trade agreement. It created genuinely supranational institutions, a high authority with independent decision-making power, a common assembly, a council of ministers, and a court of justice. For the first time in history, sovereign nations voluntarily transferred portions of their authority to institutions that could make binding decisions without unanimous consent. The ECSC began operations in 1952, and within a few years, coal and steel production in member states had increased dramatically while prices fell. The success of the ECSC sparked an ambitious question. If integration worked for coal and steel, why not expand it? By the mid-1950s, the 6 member states were negotiating 2 new treaties. The first would create a European Economic Community, a common market that would eliminate tariffs and allow the free movement of goods, services, capital, and labor among member states. The second would establish a European Atomic Energy Community to coordinate peaceful nuclear research. On March 25, 1957, representatives gathered in Rome's Palazzo dei Conservatori and signed the Treaties of Rome, bringing both communities into existence. The European Economic Community, or EEC, was particularly significant. Its preamble spoke of laying the foundations of an ever-closer union among the peoples of Europe, a phrase that would become both a guiding principle and a source of controversy for decades to come. The EEC's early years exceeded expectations. By eliminating internal tariffs ahead of schedule and establishing a common external tariff, the 6 member states created the world's largest trading bloc after the United States. agricultural policy was harmonized through the Common Agricultural Policy, which guaranteed prices for farmers and ensured food security, though it would later become notorious for creating butter mountains and wine lakes through overproduction. Economic growth in the 1960s was remarkable, with member states experiencing what the French called the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 glorious years of post-war prosperity. This success attracted attention. In 1961, the United Kingdom, which had initially dismissed the EEC as a continental project of little relevance to a global trading nation, applied for membership. However, French President Charles de Gaulle vetoed British entry twice, in 1963 and 1967, fearing that Britain would act as an American Trojan horse and dilute the community's European character. The community finally expanded in 1973, when the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Denmark joined, bringing membership to 9. This first enlargement revealed tensions that would persist throughout the EU's history. Britain, under Prime Minister Edward Heath, had joined enthusiastically, but public opinion remained skeptical. Just 2 years later, a referendum on continued membership saw 67% vote to remain, but the debate never truly ended. Greece joined in 1981, followed by Spain and Portugal in 1986. These southern enlargements had a different character. All three countries were emerging from authoritarian rule, Greece from military dictatorship, Spain from Franco's regime, and Portugal from Salazar's Estado Novo. Membership in the European community was seen as a guarantee of democratic stability and a return to the European family of nations. The community accepted them despite their weaker economies, recognizing that political consolidation of democracy was worth the economic cost. But the most transformative moment was yet to come. By the late 1980s, the European community faced a choice. It could remain primarily an economic arrangement, a sophisticated customs union with some political cooperation, or it could take the leap toward genuine political union. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union added urgency to this question. German reunification was imminent, and many European leaders, particularly French President François Mitterrand, worried about a reunified Germany dominating the continent. The solution, once again, was deeper integration. If Germany was bound into European institutions, its power could be channeled constructively rather than feared. Negotiations culminated in the Dutch city of Maastricht, where on February 7, 1992, representatives of the 12 member states signed the Treaty on European Union. This was the birth certificate of the European Union as we know it. The Maastricht Treaty didn't just rename the European community, it fundamentally transformed it. The treaty established 3 pillars: the European communities handling economic integration, a common foreign and security policy for coordinated diplomacy, and cooperation in justice and home affairs. It created European citizenship, granting every national of a member state the right to live, work, and vote in local elections anywhere in the Union. Most dramatically, it laid the groundwork for economic and monetary union and a single currency, the euro. The path to the euro was carefully structured. Countries wanting to adopt the currency had to meet strict convergence criteria: inflation rates within 1.5 percentage points of the 3 best-performing states, budget deficits below 3% of GDP, public debt below 60% of GDP, stable exchange rates, and long-term interest rates within 2 percentage points of the 3 lowest inflation states. These criteria, enshrined in the Stability and Growth Pact, were designed to ensure that only economies with similar characteristics would share a currency. On January 1, 1999, the euro was launched as an accounting currency in 11 countries, with physical notes and coins entering circulation on January 1, 2002. Today, 20 countries use the euro, making it the second most traded currency in the world after the US dollar. The Maastricht Treaty came into force on November 3, 1993, but not without controversy. Danish voters initially rejected it in a referendum, only approving it a year later after Denmark secured opt-outs from certain provisions. France approved it by the narrowest of margins, just 51%. These close calls revealed a growing gap between political elites who championed integration and citizens who felt increasingly distant from Brussels-based institutions. Nevertheless, the European Union pressed forward. The 1990s saw the creation of the Schengen area, which eliminated border controls among participating countries, allowing passport-free travel across much of the continent. The Amsterdam and Nice treaties refined institutional structures, preparing for the EU's most ambitious enlargement yet. In 2004, 10 countries joined simultaneously: Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, and Cyprus. This Eastern enlargement was historic, reuniting a continent divided by the Iron Curtain for nearly half a century. Bulgaria and Romania followed in 2007, and Croatia in 2013, bringing total membership to 28. Each wave of enlargement brought new challenges. Wealthier Western members worried about migration from poorer Eastern countries, while new members sometimes chafed at regulations designed for different economic contexts. The EU developed elaborate mechanisms to manage these tensions, including transition periods for labor mobility and substantial structural funds to help poorer regions develop. Today, the European Union stands as a unique experiment in post-national governance. With 27 member states after the United Kingdom's departure in 2020, it represents some 450 million people and generates roughly 17% of global GDP. It has its own currency used by 20 countries, a directly elected parliament, a court whose rulings supersede national law, and a common foreign policy apparatus. Citizens can live, work, study, and retire anywhere within its borders. Standards for everything from food safety to data privacy are harmonized. Yet it remains a union of sovereign states, not a federal superstate. Member countries retain control over taxation, most social policy, and core aspects of foreign policy and defense. The EU's journey from the ashes of 1945 to today's complex institution reflects both remarkable achievement and ongoing tension. The vision of Monnet and Schuman that economic interdependence could transform political relationships has been validated. War between France and Germany, which seemed inevitable for generations, is now unthinkable. Democracy has been consolidated across Southern and Eastern Europe. Prosperity has spread, though unevenly. Yet the project faces persistent questions. How much sovereignty should nations surrender to common institutions? How can democratic accountability function at a continental scale? Can a union of such diverse economies and cultures maintain cohesion during crises? These questions have no final answers, only ongoing negotiations. What makes the European Union historically unique is not that it solved these problems, but that it created a framework for managing them peacefully. For a continent that spent centuries resolving disputes through warfare, this represents a genuine revolution. The birth of the European Union wasn't a single moment, but a process, one that began with 6 countries pooling coal and steel and continues today as 27 nations navigate the complexities of shared sovereignty. Whether this experiment will endure, expand, or eventually fragment remains an open question. But the fact that it exists at all, that ancient enemies became partners and former dictatorships became democracies through voluntary integration, stands as one of the most remarkable political achievements of the modern era. The story of the EU's birth is ultimately a story about whether nations can learn from history, whether cooperation can triumph over conflict, and whether shared institutions can channel human ambition toward collective prosperity rather than mutual destruction. 7 decades after Schuman's declaration, that experiment continues. If you enjoyed this geopolitical content, please subscribe for more European deep dives. See you next time!